women standing up for their rights,
Yay.
and red-headed women who should not be taunted at any cost.
Yay.
Hey.
So red-headed women. Michelle's a redhead. Yeah. Yeah, we won't talk about
Margaret
that.
used to be.
Margaret used to be.
I used to be, yeah.
My mum used to be.
Yeah.
My beard was red.
It's funny how that happens with men, isn't it? Nearly always the beard comes through with ginger.
Well, I just thought it's the Scottish side because my cousin had ginger hair as well.
Yeah, it's the Scottish thing. My beard comes out ginger as well.
Well, is this the Ginger Society, which is in Sherlock Holmes?
Have you got any?
What, gingers? We could all do with a ginger. Michelle is a ginger, and her daughter's a ginger. My children, all six of them, I got one's got black hair. No, two. I think one's got dark brown, and there's two sort of. The rest are blonde.
Right, work that out.
Yeah, I'm not saying anything.
No.
Yeah, because I can remember my ex-wife saying, 4 of these children are mine, and she said only 2 are yours. I just still can't really work out what that means. Right, so on that note, we're going to start off with anyone who's got any news. I don't know where Anne is tonight. Janice is about to leave now because she's not doing this without Anne, but that's life. Because they're best buddies, and I think they've fallen out because Anne refused to buy her an ice cream. You know what Anne's like with sort of sugar and stuff. Right, so let's get started. Right,
I saw Anne yesterday, and she's fine.
you know I like talking crap. Right, okay then. Richard and what the other woman called Emma. Do you know what? I only hear from Emma once a week.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah, let's just leave that one there.
Yeah.
Right, Emma and Richard. You've got to call him Richard because we can't have 2 things.
Yeah, he's right. Richard's good. Richard's good.
I know it's me. Then I can talk.
Good.
Yeah, no.
Anyway.
We haven't got anything to say anyway. That's coffee.
All right, fair enough. The woman with the most beautifulest glasses in the planet, Drina.
Yes. Hello. I've got no news.
All right,
if that's what you're asking. Sorry. Do the glasses make up for it?
This is a tribute to John Stevenson, and Peter getting annoyed with him putting stuff on his head. Janice.
Yeah.
Anything?
No.
Right. I will mention that this is basically, there used to be a guy who used to join our classes that used to put his underwear on his head, and I am not joking.
Brilliant.
David, anything you got to say?
No, thank you.
David didn't take part in those classes. It was just too much. Right, Andy.
No, nothing this week. Sorry.
Margaret.
I just saw something about the Mesolithic age arriving in the Mediterranean a lot earlier than they thought. They found evidence in Malta.
Ooh.
In Malta. But I can't remember what they found, but they said it was much earlier than at first thought.
It just occurred. It was just sporadic.
They found things underneath something in Malta.
Yeah. That's true. And talking about strange things, Judith. Go on, Judith.
Where is she?
She says she was saying on a message online she was struggling to hear what people were saying, so she was going to try and watch it later. But I don't know whether
she's still there.
Yeah. Says I'm really struggling to catch. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Go on.
Yeah, I'm really struggling to catch everyone speaking, so we'll watch online and comment. I don't know. I really don't know what to say about that. Right, so let's just crack on. And Emma knows about this. I got a few active trolls at this minute, right? And so they won't interfere with us, but that's life. I thought I'd make that to give a bit of impact. Yes, I was filming last week on Tuesday and Wednesday, and yes, I was based in a church for 2 whole days. And yes, I did lots of film work inside the church for my own channel, whilst I was being paid to be on a production, which we're not allowed to mention live. Thank you very much. That was very, very good. And I'm sorry that I missed you all last week on Tuesday and Wednesday, but I had a thoroughly wonderful time. At such an extent that on Wednesday they wouldn't let me go home because my bag was stuffed with biscuits. But other than that, they wouldn't let me go home. Oh, the security guard come up. She said, you know, why have you, what? I got to report you for keep nicking all the biscuits. Anyway, other than that, I was kept behind last week until just gone past 10 o'clock. So because they wanted to keep me. So yes. That was rather interesting. And you know what? I've got my own costume fitter now, and my own, which is great. Hats off to my costume fitter who begins with an S. He gets paid extra time, so that was good. Oh yeah, I'll stay. That's good, brilliant. Okay. Other than that, I wanted to do Cartimandua tonight, and now you've probably heard of this wonderful Queen of the North, who's both placed in legend as a hero and also placed in legend as somebody that is derided. She's a very different figure than Boudicca or Bothig, who was that queen of the Iceni, who died roughly AD 61. Cartimandua, on the other hand, was still bumping around and banging her drums up until 69 AD 69. And she's not really heard as much about, but she's equally influential in the way history's written about her, i.e. Tacitus and so on. Now, we've not actually entered the Roman period at all yet, but we have, in that I wanted to speak about a figure. We haven't concluded my Iron Age yet, but I wanted to sort of dabble into a figure like Cartimandua to sort of look at the stark contrast between Iron Age Britain and the Roman world. And the issue is just simply thus, that the Roman world is male dominated and the Iron Age world is female dominated. One's a maternal society and one's a patriarchal society, and that's basically the two stark differences. So, and I thought it would be good to look at Cartimandua rather than Boudica or Boadicea first, simply because the story of Boadicea seems to be more Roman led rather than the independent kingdom of the likes of the Brigantes up north, which we've got lots of, we've got a few maps and we've got a few images, a few texts of Tacitus, and two stark contrasting writers. One wishing to look at why has history overlooked Cartimandua by an author of a book known as Jill Armitage, and then we're going to look at the standard text, which looks at Cartimandua as a general figure. And she's also the spelling for Cartimandua is also with an S in there, so it's spelled Cartis, one S there, Mandua, so that'd be Cartimandua rather than Cartimandua, but both terms are actually used. So she was this sort of queen. Let's set the stall. She was a queen who lived after the birth of Christ. She was we can't really get a date of when she was precisely born, but her reign, if she was 20 years old, maybe her, and therefore she was born around AD 23. We don't really know, but we'll chuck that in there. So her reign really started to begin a little bit around AD 43, and she passed away in AD 69. She started as a hero of the British people, and then she ended up as a derided anti-hero of the British people, or in my book, she's still a hero. But that's something else. And let's use this term fluidly. The Brigantes, Celtic, and Northern England. Obviously, Northern England didn't exist back then, but then again, where you see Northern England on the Brigantes map is in a way where Northern England is today, and including the wonderful, very little known county of Cumbria, which I do believe doesn't exist in name anymore, does it? But anyway, that's life. But let's look at that is correct, isn't it, Andy? The word Cumbria is no longer going to be used.
Yeah, I believe so. We're Westmoreland and Furness now, so
Yeah.
Oh right, what a silly thing that is.
Hmm.
What a wonderful Cumberland. What a wonderful sort of name to lose. So
I'm sure it's still
yeah.
a geographic area, like Westmoreland is still a geographic area.
Or Hard Knot Pass.
Yes.
Now, I heard you all talking about Hard Knot Pass, so I thought I'd get some images. That is Hard Knot
Oh,
Pass.
yeah. Yeah. Brilliant.
I remember going up there with my ex-fiance, the mother of two of my children who live in Cumbria. We drove up here and there was a car coming down and her brakes couldn't take it, so we had to reverse all the way down to the bottom of the hill. And she was not pleased. This was I think a big Picasso type car. I can't remember what they call, but anyway, a Vauxhall or whatever. But anyway, it just we had to reverse all the way back, then driving up Hard Knot, and then we went to the likes of the sort of west coast then, and we did a few things there. But Hard Knot, I've actually been there twice, and talking about my I don't do it as daily anymore, but I've done a couple in the past few days, looking at the Roman era stone remains in Britain. I haven't actually done Hard Knot yet, which is quite odd, even though I've been to Hard Knot, and it's a area that I'm going to be looking at in one of my 1 minute videos that I try to do. And when we do look at the Roman period, there's going to be a lot. There's going to be a lot that we're going to be covering, and I've just I'm probably putting it off a little bit because I'm trying to work out how I'm going to do it all in my head, because the Roman period in Britain is quite a really big subject. This is one thing you missed. I got to tell you a little bit of a story, right? It's involving this ring, right? And it involved back before the pandemic. There was this lovely man called David. Another David. David's always seemed to be nice people. And David married to Chris. There's a story here. Now, this was in 2013, and David was involved in one of my excavations. And Chris and David used to come to my classes in Lantwick Major. Now, David was involved in an archaeological excavation with me, and the following year we had a trip organised to Orkney, right? And the weird thing was that they've got a daughter called Helen, and anyway, well, David passed away sadly, and Chris couldn't cope with coming to the classes anymore, and that was it. But their daughter Helen knew that I was in the acting circuit, right? And she's been carrying this ring around with her for 10 years, wondering if she's going to bump into me on set. And she said on a Tuesday she got so excited that I was actually on set that she turned up the next day on the floor of the church, and she knelt down and she gave me a ring, right? And she said, I've been wanting you to identify this ring for the past 10 years. And identified it. It turned out to be a toe ring, and there's 4 little diamonds there, and there's 1 diamond either end. So you've got these tiny. And I identified this as a toe ring, and it's solid copper with a silver nickel coating, which is worn off. And I identified this precisely to around the 1970s, actually. So and yeah, so that was rather interesting. And it's rather interesting that you come across people after loads of time, and it's so good. Anyway, I thought I'd share that with you. Now, let's get into the Cartimandua properly. So we know a lot about Cartimandua in the eyes and from the eyes of the Roman writer Tacitus. Now, the Roman writer Tacitus is somebody whose name we'll come across a fair bit. Tacitus probably wrote about the likes of Cartimandua after his death, because he wasn't born until AD 56, and then you can imagine that he's not going to really be a big scholar until the AD 70s, and Cartimandua died in AD 69. So as much as we know a lot from the Roman writer Tacitus, he's obviously writing in a second prose about Cartimandua. Now, Cartimandua, there she is in the middle there, and this is a nice portraiture, and this is actually from the 1800s, and the caption is Caraticus on the left. Again, Caraticus, that figure there, the Caraticus on the left, described as king of the Silures, delivered up to Astorius, and there's Astorius there on the throne next door to a tent. The Roman general by Cartimandua. So Cartimandua is the one in the middle, Queen of the Brigantes, and this was a print by F. Bartolozzi, British Museum. Now, Cartimandua is somebody who's intrinsically linked with Caraticus. Now, there's a few bits of things I want to say now, that lots of the tribal names are names that the Romans attributed to tribes. It's not what the names that tribal people called themselves by. And this is what I talk about in my book, The Romans in South Wales. If anyone wants a copy of that, they need to let me know in the break. It's going to be very important that you have a copy of my book, Romans in South Wales. And by the way, I'm reminded by Judith that she paid for 2 copies that she's willing for me to send out, and there you go. But if you're interested in a copy, then I talk about the Silures and how the name was derived from the Romans, and I talk about Caraticus a lot, and I talk about various things like that. So that would link in. But Caraticus is a very interesting figure. He's a bit like King Arthur, where he happens to turn up everywhere. So if Caraticus is going to be the king of the Silures, what is he doing king of the Silures? What is he doing in Glamorgan in South Wales when he was actually the leader of the Catavalani tribe, which is around London? So there might actually be 2 Caraticuses, right? But that's another story altogether. We might do Caraticus as an individual figure. It's a bit like King Arthur, really. He gets everywhere. So somehow Caraticus ends up in northern England. And then the story is, with giving a lot away here, that Caraticus is handed over to Astorius, the Roman general. But there is oddness with that story. Again, I don't really want to dominate that with that story. Now, look at that beautiful image there. Now, did she look like that? Yeah. She obviously had red hair, and maybe the lipstick's wrong. But then again, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about these stridently beautiful women that were able to display themselves. In other words, women could be who they want to be. Women could wear gold. They could have talks. They could wear their hair whatever they like. They can demand sex from any man that they want, which is not a good choosing, because it's not as a grandiose thing that men would think it is. And because women had the power to have you executed, to have you removed from society. And so this is a very different world than ancient Rome. Whereas at the same time, when you're talking about the 60s, AD 60s, if you were a Roman if you were a Roman woman and you were in Rome, you were not able to display your wealth. You're not able to display your sexuality. Very similar to a religion that's on the planet today, where if you had gold, you had to wear it under a cloak. If you had beautiful hair and you had a display of being a woman, this is something that was frowned upon in ancient Rome. And very few women actually had any power in ancient Rome. But in Iron Age, the Iron Age world up the north, in particularly Britain, women had the power. And we see that with the archaeological excavations at Geropolis in Dorset, which we did probably, I don't know if that was 6-7 weeks ago or maybe 2 months ago, where we talked about the Oppidum, the city, the town, the Iron Age great place of occupation where thousands of people lived in Dorset, which is near the Trigi capital of Maiden Castle. Now, the story of this woman is so very important, and what we can say is if we're trying to get this together, right, that she was married to somebody by the name of she was married, well, a husband, if we want to get to that. Her husband was somebody by the name of Venutius. Now, some books and sources might say that Cartimandua and Venutius reigned from AD 43. It's just convenient for historical sources. Maybe they reigned slightly after that. But they were co-reigning. They reigned together. They were king and queen. I had power, you had power. This is the way it worked. Not that the man had power, we both had power. So that's a very important thing. Venutius. And what happened, just giving us a little bit of the story about Venutius, that she eventually divorced him and took a lover known as Velocatus. And this meant that this caused some instability across the kingdom of the Brigantes. So let's just move on and let's just go back to this in a minute. This is the kingdom of the Brigantes. It's absolutely, that gives you an idea. It's bloody huge, right? It stretches all the way from the east to the west coast. This is a huge area that the Brigantes actually had in their control. There's Stanwix there, that we've mentioned Stanwix before. That is the great city, the great Oppidum of the Brigantes, and Barwick in Elmet, which is something that we don't cover today, but Stanwix is the main one. Now one thing that we would say is she's reigning with Venutius until AD 51, right? And then it's a very difficult concept to mete out. She divorces Venutius. She is still sort of with Venutius, but she then remarries Velocatus in AD 51. So in other words, Venutius and Cartimandua Velocatus are all reigning at the same time between 51 and AD 69. And you can imagine that really didn't work. So that's the whole point of the story, right? And there has been a number of books written about this figure, Cartimandua, Nikki Howarth and Jill Armitage, which is actually we look at some of Jill Armitage's text today. So if we're setting the scene, obviously they're medieval carvings, but if we're setting the scene of this woman, she came to power during the time period that Rome was campaigning against Britain. So both Venutius and Cartimandua had to see where their bread was buttered. Now, going on throughout this whole thing, by about AD 60 and AD 61, the Brigantes didn't rebel against Rome in the way that the rebels under Boadicea rebelled. For example, if you can think of the situation and the map. So in AD 61, I'm sorry to chuck all these dates at you, but the dates are quite sort of easy. If we think about, hang on, we've got the pen and change the color. If we think about basically the date range, and we think about from here to 51. Now, 53 is the key date. That's the date that Rome invades Britain. Oh my God, Anne's just joined us. I'm gonna have to go off screen. Okay, because I haven't actually given Andy Duda. Right, okay, I'll bring her on. Right, okay, let's get back to where I was. And oh, Andy, I'm gonna give you Duda just in case anybody else joins us. Right, Andy, make co-host. Right, so back to where we were going, but let's get back to that map whilst it's still in my head. Map. Nice to have you along, Anne. We're talking about Cartimandua. So what I was talking about, those dates. Now, trying to get your mind around this. So you've got the three figures. You've got Cartimandua, you've got Venetius, and you've got Velicatus. So you've got those three figures. Now, to sort of get these dates in our minds, if we think about AD 43, that is a key date. AD 43 is the Roman invasion date, right? That is when Britain is starting to become subjugated under Roman rule. End of. Let's move that date away. So then what we've got is roughly somewhere after AD 43, leading up to 51 AD, you've got these two figures. You've got, for example, Venetius, which is in fact the wife of Cartimandua, which we'll call her Carti. And then the date 51 is also the time that, up to that date, Cartimandua divorces because she's able to. She doesn't need permission off her husband. She says, right, I'm divorcing you. I don't want you in my bed anymore. I'm divorcing you. Which is an abhorrent text to the Romans, but she takes her lover, who is in fact Velicatus. Now, you would think that these names have got a Roman assimilation. Yes, they do, because these names have all come to us by Tacitus, the Roman writer Tacitus. If these names Cartimandua, Venutius, and Velicatus are slightly different, it's because Tacitus is writing these things down, right? And so between this key date of 51 all the way to 69, AD 69, the likes of Cartimandua with Velicatus alongside Venetius, they're all sort of reigning and sort of squabbling, right? And then at one time when Cartimandua is in trouble, this is a bit of a sort of introduction still, when Cartimandua is in trouble, she asks for the help of Rome. You can see what's going on. The interesting key date here is that the Brigantes are actually friends, more or less, of the Romans. They're not really interested in fighting the Romans. If we think about the date AD 61 or maybe AD 60, different books say different things, but it's definitely around that time, where there's a massive rebellion, and the rebellion basically takes up this part of the country, and it's led by the Iceni, right, under the command of Boudica. And Boudica basically heads from the territory of the Iceni, and she sets light to Camalundunum, Colchester. I can't wait to give the lecture on Colchester because it's so blood curdly, right? You're gonna love it, right? We even have rolling skulls, all sorts of things, all sorts of wonderful things. And then she gets to Londinium. London's evacuated, and you've got the River Walbrook in London. And then she ends up in Verulamium, which is modern day St. Albans. Now, as you can possibly say, this is why I struggle to do the Roman stuff, because I could give one single lecture on Colchester now this second, because it's all in my head and it would just be like that. So I'm going to be very careful how I do this. But this is why we're doing these introductions. But one thing you can clearly see is if the likes of Cartimandua had rebelled at the same time as Boudica, right, the Romans would have been kicked out of Britain. That's it. There's actually no discussion on that, right? Do you know when you get so many people discussing if Germany would have done this and that in the Second World War, would Germany have won, right? The answer is always no. However, AD 61, if Cartimandua, Venetius, and Velicatus had rebelled on the side of the likes of the Iceni, the Romans would have been kicked out of Britain. That would have been it. However, the part I want to make, which is a point I always make, whether or not Rome itself had been kicked out of Britain in AD 61, where we would be in the history of Britain today would be exactly the same place, because what would have happened is that there would have been this city at, hang on a minute, what would have happened, let me get my sharing again. What would have happened would be a blue, that's a Stanwick. What would have, hang on a minute, let's just let's try and get bigger screen a minute. Right, here we go. What would have happened, Stanwick in blue, hang on a minute, that blue bit there, Stanwick, would have become a big city, not too far away from modern day York, to be honest with you. The likes of, I got to remember where exactly we are. I think Geropolis is around there. And then we've got Caliva Atrobatum is there. These would be the cities. And you can imagine that Caliva Atrobatum isn't far away from London, really. So, in fact, the centres of where we are today in the world would have probably developed in around the same places. So, in the history of Britain, it doesn't really matter whether Rome conquers Britain or not. That's what we're trying to say. We didn't need the Romans, really. We could have done it ourselves. So that's one thing I do say, and lots of other authors think that today. Now, it's good to be doing the one subject of Cartimandua today. As you can see, it's flowing, and I could just keep going with this, right? Now, when you think about this area, and you can think also, some maps do show your beloved Cumbria up there. Now, she came to power during this wonderful time period after AD 43, and she was widely influential during her reign as ruler of the Brigantes. She united various British tribes that eventually surrendered their loyalty to Rome. In other words, she's seen as a traitor. But then again, was she a traitor? Should she be treated by history as a traitor? So the one thing that we're going to do, we will look at the work of Jill Armitage just a little bit. And what does she say? Does she say that Cartimandua is a traitor or not? And this is a really interesting question. I'm saying she's not, right? Because she saved lives. The one thing to be said about Cartimandua is the lesson from history, right? Now, the lesson from history is quite clear, right? And we're just going to give you a little bit of a lesson in history. That's why you're here, isn't it? To learn about history. So the lesson in history is we're going to go forward in time, and we're going to go forward to this date, the 14th of October, 1066. And I don't need to remind you what happened that day. That was the Battle of Hastings. And it's quite odd, really. It's really odd that there's a lot in parallel with what was happening in Britain in around 61 AD, and the parallels are as follows: that if Cartimandua had joined Boadicea, and Cartimandua and Boadicea had failed against Rome, it's likely that large swathes of the population, as happened under the Iceni, because they rebelled against Rome, large swathes of the population would have probably likely have been massacred by the Romans in revenge for the rebellion, right? What simply happened was that Cartimandua decided that she was not going to rebel against Rome because she saw what happened against the Iceni, right? She held things back and she went to see what was going to happen with the Iceni. The Iceni were defeated, and therefore the people of the Iceni were brutally subjugated in the east of Britain under Roman rule. So, Carl, what are you on about? What has this got to do with the 14th of October, 1066? Come on, bloody spit it out, for God's sake. Well, even though the 14th of October, 1066 is years later, right, is 1,000 years later. This was a pre-lesson of history because the people of the North would not take kindly to King William ruling over Britain and kept rebellion. There were constant harryings of the North by the Normans, and there was great butchery of the people of the North, particularly this area which is marked on the map of the Brigantes, this northern area, right? There was so much butchery because these people in the North rebelled against the Normans after 1066, roughly from 1066 to about 1090, right? There's big swathes of the north of England that are not in a Doomsday Book because most villages have been burnt and destroyed, right? The reverse happened under the reign of Cartimandua because initially there wasn't a great rebellion against the Romans. It meant that large tracts of the population were saved from the butchery that the Iceni faced. So that's basically that sort of bit of a link and sort of going into that sort of history. But it's not as straightforward at that because some Brigantes did fight the Romans, so it's not as easy as that. It's the same as in at the time of the Normans after 1066. 1,000 years later, going into the North, there were obviously people in the North who were friends with the Normans as well. It's the same with the people of Cymru, Wales. There was a population in Wales that invited the Normans in, and there was a big population in Wales that didn't want the Normans in. The same happened with the Scots. The same happened with the likes of the Irish. But let's get back to Iron Age Britain. So Cartimandua is portrayed notoriously in Tacitus's account of her. She is recorded betraying the Celtic chieftain Caraticus. This goes back to this little story. In sincerely offering him sanctuary, but instead turning him into the Romans in exchange for wealth. So, in fact, she was saving her backside, right? She was keeping her people safe, or you could argue many different ways. Now, what happens is that after Caraticus is then imprisoned by the Romans under the governorship of Astorius Scapula, you'll also see in my book a list of governors. When Caraticus is handed over to him, Caraticus is then taken to Rome, and then he's placed in front of the great Roman emperors of the day, i.e. Claudius. Now, she did hand him over, but what could she have done with him anyway? Because by keeping Caraticus within a city of Stanwick, Opidium or Stanwick or somewhere else, right, she would draw the Romans into her territory. She would draw the Romans into fighting against the Brigantes. So I think she did herself a favor and she did her people a favor. But the story's a lot more complicated than that. I'm just making it so easy to try and get our minds around. But the story of Cartimandua is extremely complex compared to Boudica, for example. Boudica hated the Romans because of X, Y, and Z. Cartimandua, X, Y, and Z somewhere else. So she also is recorded for her having divorced a consort and replaced him with a common military man. So that's a point. The likes when she divorced her husband, who was of regal blood, Venetius, when she then married Velicatus. Velicatus was just was just a squire, was just a military man, and this was seen to be quite quite difficult to actually cope with. So she subsequently engaged in extended military conflict with her ex-husband as he staged revolts against her multiple times, eventually losing to him. So that is the point. Let's just read that out again, right? So if we go to a little table, this is the table from, where is it now? There. This makes it sensible. Let's just read that again. So what happened? She decided to divorce her husband. Venutius was still had, power, right? But Cartimandua was the one who wore the trousers, right? She married Velicatus in AD 51. She consequently engaged in extended military conflict with her ex-husband, Venutius, as he staged revolts against her multiple times, eventually losing to him. And when she lost to him, she basically said to Rome, "Come on, boys, help me out." And the Romans helped. Strangely enough, the Romans helped Cartimandua when the Romans were not really on the side of Boudica. So there's lots of politics at play here. Cartimandua is first mentioned of her exploits by Tacitus, her exploits being not written down in AD 51, but the story from AD 51 is being written down by Tacitus. Her rule over the Brigantes may already have been established when the Roman Emperor Claudius began the organized conquest of Britain in AD 43. So we can't really say when the likes of this wonderful queen of these people. I'm not saying that that's Cartimandua at all. Maybe this is Cartimandua, or maybe this is what Cartimandua was like. I'm sure she looked like this. Now, this is the thing. She may have been ruling with her husband for a couple of years before AD 43. She may have been one of the 11 kings. Now that's really odd, isn't it? Reading that out, she may have been one of the 11 kings who Claudius's triumphal arch says surrendered without a fight. So we're referring to her as a king, right? And this looks very similar. Okay, you don't need to see any parallels because they're obvious. Cartimandua is very similar to the likes of Queen Elizabeth I, and definitely Queen Elizabeth II, where she is the one who's classed as the king, the leader, the one who's wearing the trousers, which is the wrong terminology to use. I could be definitely slighted and smited for using that term, but we all know what we're getting at, because this is a society controlled and dominated by women. And you know the worm that turned in Corbett and Barker with the two Ronnies, right? You all remember that, the worm that turned, where women, yeah, if you know the sketch. So this is one of the great things that, you know, she may have actually. There's another story about Cartimandua that even if she wasn't one of the kings mentioned, you know, they basically mentioned that there was this leader. There was this leader of the Brigantes, right? It might have been that somewhere around the time of, it said in AD 48, Cartimandua, seeing that her people were defeated in some kind of rebellion against the Romans. This is another story against Publius Ostorius Scapula, the Roman governor of Britain at that time. She basically saw we may as well be friends with the Romans. So she said, "Come on, boys, I'm pro-Roman." This was in AD 48, and then this leads to the story of Caraticus in by AD 51. Now, Tacitus, writing amongst other things, being of illustrious birth, according to Tacitus, Cartimandua probably inherited her power, as she does not appear to have obtained it through marriage. So hang on a minute, hang on a minute. So what's going on here? What is the story? So if we read out that, I didn't actually say, did I? I didn't actually say who is the real one who decides to marry here. I haven't mentioned that bit of the story. So this is the next interesting bit. So Cartimandua probably inherited her power. So she was the one. She was definitely like Queen Elizabeth I, definitely like Queen Elizabeth II. She was the one who chose her husband, right? She was the one who decided to marry. Now, so in other words, she didn't become queen through marriage. She had the title as leader. Whoever she married, she was the one who was in charge, not the king, not Venetius. She was the one. She and her first husband Venetius are described by Tacitus as loyal to Rome and defended by our Roman arms. Her name may be a compound of the common Celtic roots carti, chase, expel, send, and mandua, pony. So how does that work? So let's just get my little bit of writing on the screen, and we'll do exactly the same when we look at Boudica, Boudig, or Boudica. Now, basically, if we want to look at if we write this in full, Carti, Mandua, Mandua. So one thing that we can talk about is that Carti there, the first bit there, Carti, which is there, Carti, might mean chase, expel, or send, right? So in other words, chase, expel, it's a Celtic root, it's a Celtic name, it's not a Roman name. It may have been Romanized, but it's a Roman, the Jew bit, A on the end may be a bit of a Romanization, right? But that might mean chase, expel, send. This is somebody with a lot of energy, right? Energy, and this is where the bit pony comes in, because that might be the word for pony. If that's the word for pony, Mandua, pony. So she may be the very strong, the very energetic pony. So she's the in other words, the red-headed, energetic pony of the Brigantes, which is quite a weird way to look at that. But if that's true or not, I don't really know. Now, what's going on here is that the story of the betrayal of Caraticus. Now, this again is very, very important, and we're not really halfway through the story yet. So let's just try and get halfway through the story, and then we'll do the next bit. So let's just change the image again. That's the Cartimandua, Queen of the Brigantes. Again, it's focusing on the Queen of the Brigantes, not Venetius, because I think this the story that she is this huge, impressive leader with great influence. And sorry, that she was of no noble birth, and she was the one who was going to be in charge. So the betrayal of Caraticus. Now, let's look at the quote. This lady betrayed Caraticus. Okay, so there we go. Hang on. Where is this? Ah, there we go. This is what Tacitus says. Writings about Caraticus. In AD 51, the British resistance leader Caraticus sought sanctuary with Cartimandua after being defeated by Ostorius Scapula in Wales. Now, again, it's that there's lots to be said about Caraticus. Is Caraticus the same leader that first faced the Romans, Claudius, in AD 43, and as leader of the Catavolano people in the middle of Britain? Is this the same person? Because he definitely ends up in Wales, or is it another leader with exactly the same name in Wales, i.e. the leader of the people of South Wales, which eventually the Romans called the Silures, or their Slegwr. But anyway, whatever way we look at that, and that's another talk and discussion altogether. Cartimandua handed him over to the Romans in chains, according to Craticus. Now, the one thing to be said about all that is this is definitely a very interesting story, and one thing leading to all of this is how much can we bear upon what Tacitus is saying. And interesting enough, Tacitus is actually given us a story that wouldn't be accepted in Rome. A woman with power, how is that going? So is he telling the true story? Is he overdoing it? Is he making out this woman to be a she-wolf? It's really difficult to look at that. So anyway, according to Tacitus, she had later strengthened her power when she was credited with having captured King Caraticus by treachery, and so furnished an adornment for the triumph of Claudius Caesar. Now, by this whole thing, looking at this, is that by capturing King Caraticus, Caradog is another name, by treachery, and so furnished an adornment for the triumph of Claudius Caesar. So in other words, the capture of Caraticus was a great thing for Claudius, not Julius Caesar, Claudius Caesar. Now, this is another thing I need to explain. Claudius the First, right? AD 43, Claudius the First invades Britain to eventually be assassinated by Nero, right? However, we don't need to go there. So Claudius the First is Caesar, right? Caesar is a title bestowed upon a leader that becomes that becomes leader of the Roman world. It's Claudius Caesar from Julius Caesar, was assassinated in 44 BC. So this can only be akin to the Allies capturing Adolf Hitler at the end of the Second World War. This was a great triumph to capture Claudius. This is a great triumph for Claudius to have Caraticus captured. From this came her wealth and the wanton spirit which success breeds, or treachery. Now, I don't know if this stage that you guys think that, handing over Caraticus, making sure that people weren't butchered by the Romans is the right thing to do. I think it's the right thing to do. But the fact of the matter is, Tacitus is writing that down. And all of this springs, let's read this in its entirety. She had later strengthened her power when she was credited with having captured King Caraticus by treachery, and so furnished an adornment for the triumph of Claudius Caesar. From this came a wealth and the wanton spirit which success breeds. Claudius was taken through the streets of Rome in chains and dragged in front and forced down in front of this very great Emperor Claudius. But we don't need to go any further with that. Now, back to where I was. So let's just think about a little bit more back to this story, right? Now, the one thing that do we know that people in Iron Age Britain looked like this? Their shields, we do know. Their swords, we do know. We get an idea of some of the fabric has actually survived, so this might be close. Whether their hair looked like that, we've got the idea that shaving facial hair is very important to facial body hair for male and females in Iron Age society is quite important. You would think that they're all wearing beards, but they're not. Cartimandua later divorced Venetius, taking his armor bearer Velicatus as her consort. In AD 57, although Cartimandua has seized his brother and other relatives and held them hostage, Venetius made war against her and then against her Roman protectors. So in other words, Cartimandua isn't really a supporter of her ex-husband anymore. Venetius is rebelling against the likes of Cartimandua. He's slighted. And the way people did things then, and this is probably something that Cartimandua learned from the Romans, that if you're to keep peace, you're to take hostage the person that you want to keep peace with. So the person that you want to keep peace with is Venetius. Cartimandua held Venetius's brother and other relatives hostage. So Venetius didn't wage war against her and didn't say, "Look here, I deserve some respect as a man, right? I've got red blood inside me. I deserve some respect." She was the one who had red blood, to be honest with you. Remember, this is AD 57. This is a few years before the Boudica rebellion. This is a few years before Boudica basically rebels against Rome and nearly kicks them out of Britain. So women were the ones in charge, and I'm not really sure what Venetius is doing. Is Venetius saying, look at me, I deserve rights as a man, I need to be taken seriously? Is he saying that, or is he just basically, my French, peed off that his ex-wife had actually, she's married to Velicatus, who's just a lowly person, and maybe he's upset that his ex-wife has betrayed him, and gone off with another man. I certainly would be upset if my half, who's a red-headed woman, did that. So he built. What happened is that in Venetius rebelling against his ex-wife Cartimandua, Cartimandua basically said, "Look, Rome, I need your help." So can you see we've got a little bit of a problem? It's AD 57, right? Cartimandua is also, if we go back to the map again, Cartimandua is saying, so there we go, Brigantes. Don't forget about the territory over here. We'll get rid of that there. Don't forget about this territory here. No, that's a bit big. This is a territory of Boudica, the Iceni queen. So this is what's playing out now. This was now starting to be a pro-Roman territory with a little bit of anti-Roman, anti-Cartimandua. This is not a pro-Roman territory, right? So what we've already got playing out in AD 57, Cartimandua wasn't going to join the rebellion with Boudica, because Cartimandua is actually friends with the Romans. Now, this is a key issue with the rebellion against the Romans, led by Boudica in AD 60, AD 61. That if Boudica had managed to defeat the Romans, she was going to face Cartimandua. And could you imagine that scrap? Two females fighting. There's one red-headed woman, there's another red-headed woman. I don't know what the result would have been, because the Brigantes would have had some support of the legendary 9th Hispanic Legion that was based at Lindum, and then it would eventually be based at Baracum. Now, Lindum's not too far. Lincoln's not too far away from the Brigantes. That's where the 9th Hispanic Legion was based. They would have fled to the Brigantes, and basically they would have been the cavalry and guard for the Brigantes. These had been trained Romans. So there would have been a huge civil war in Britain, which would have been interesting, to say the least. The Romans wouldn't have been able to land a garrison in Britain to help and it would have been really, really weird. It would have been really, really strange. So basically, this Venetius was not pro-Roman. Now, there was no way he was going to be pro-Roman. Maybe it was Venetius who was going to assist Boudica's rebellion. Venetius built alliances outside the Brigantes, and during the governorship of Aulus Didius Gallus, he staged an invasion of the kingdom of the Brigantes, and the Romans had anticipated this and sent some cohorts to defend their client queen. So in other words, this is very, very different, and I think we need to remember all of this when I'm talking about this, because Boudica is treated in a very, very different way, because this is AD 57, not AD 60. The reason why Boudica rebelled, okay, there's things said that sometimes I believe it, sometimes I don't. Basically, Boudicca's daughters were defiled in front of her by the Romans after her husband Pratisagus had died, and therefore she was a bit peeved with this and she rebelled. Well, I actually disagree with that story, but that's another day altogether. However, Boudica did rebel. This is completely true. She did destroy all those Roman cities. Completely true. She had red hair and she was a vicious woman, and she did everything she needed to do to try to control and to be the person who defeats the Romans. And so, what's happening is even by 57 AD 57, Venetius is actually undertaking a rebellion against his ex-wife, and actually a rebellion against the Romans who were ruling south of the Briganti territory. Now, at this stage, the Briganti territory is not under the control of Rome. It's a client state. And again, the Romans are treating the Brigantes in a very they're basically saying to the Brigantes, you butter your bread on that side, I'll butter our bread on this side. But in regards to the people, the Iceni on the East Coast, it's led by another nutty red-headed woman that we don't like. And I think what I'm trying to get at, right, is that Cartimandua. Now, this is, I think, very important. Okay, CB, Boudica, Cartimandua. When people talk about Cartimandua, hang on, when people talk about Boudica, they say that what I've said. They say that the Romans didn't like a woman in charge. They didn't see women in Roman society as people that should have control and charge. They don't see that women should have wealth. They don't see that women should own property. This is how they treat the landscape of the Iceni on the East Coast, right? However, they treat Cartimandua in completely the different way, right? So they obviously didn't like Boudica. It's not just because she's a woman. They didn't like the way she did things, but the Romans liked the way that Cartimandua did things, and they wished to support Cartimandua, which is very odd. It just doesn't make any sense. When you tell a story, if I say tell a story, the Romans didn't want a woman in charge, right? So they wanted to get rid of her. That's not completely true, is it? I might say that. Archaeologists and historians might say that, but it's not completely true when you look at the Cartimandua and the Brigantes. So basically what happened was that it was the 9th Hispanic Legion, led by the general Cessius Nasica, who led the 9th Hispanic Legion by AD 57 against Venetius. Cartimandua retained her throne thanks to prompt military support from Roman forces. Now, there's something else to be said here that maybe I might take a break at this stage, but there is something really, really interesting to be said here. That if we go to the other map again, right? If we think of this, and this is another very interesting point. Because the 9th Legion, half of it was fighting against Boudica in AD 60, right? There's also something else going on. If Venetius had decided to attack, not the Romans, but decided to attack his ex-wife in AD 60, right? The Romans would not have been able to support Cartimandua, right? They would have been able to help against the Boudica, right? But they wouldn't have been able to help against an internal civil war between Venetius and Cartimandua. So that's a significant thing. Venetius did not take that on board, which he could have and which he should have. So what I think we are going to do now is that we're going to take a break, and that's pretty reading quite well. And we've got Judith is online, so I'm watching on YouTube now, and we've got our friend Elise from the States, so she's online, and our usual friend online, the dodgy Gits there. But other than that, who's a great friend of all of us online. But if nobody else wants to say anything online, what we're going to do, we're going to go back to you guys, and there we go. So let's see if David's got anything to say.
No, thank you. Which
Right,
David?
No,
Janice.
you're Richard.
Oh,
Janice.
No, no.
Right. Richard and Richard and Emma.
Richard David.
Yeah, you got anything to say, Dad?
Well,
No.
not really. Most of that I've
Yeah, sorry.
What's that?
asked David. It
Oh,
was
we
very
already-
interesting. And,
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Right. Oh, okay then. Okay, over to Janice and Drini.
Do you think that she would have been worried about what the Romans did to Boudica?
No, that's the point. The point is that what happened to Boudica happened after she asked for Roman help in AD 57. So Cartimandua
Okay.
thought Boudica, nothing was happening with Boudica. Nothing happened for another 3 years. Boudica was. This is the whole point. This is why we're doing it this way. This is why we're not doing. If we'd done Boudica before this, it'd get very confusing. What I'm trying to say is Cartimandua chose her actions well before everything ensued with Boudica.
Okay.
So no, it's not that. It's not influenced that way.
Right. Okay.
Janice.
No, fine. I've always been puzzled by Boudica because it seems that she rebelled when the Romans said that they'd only had an agreement with her husband, not with her. So when he died, they wanted to take her power away.
Well, the thing is, all of that is correct, right? However, some of that is not really sitting well because, you know, it's so most people argue, oh, because it's a woman, right? Well, what happened is that in Prasutagus' will, you are right. The agreement was with Prasutagus, right, until his death, right? However, in Prasutagus' will, Prasutagus basically said. And there were wills back then. There were land agreements. We know that we found these types of documents in the muds in London. You know, we've actually got transactions of ownership of land and all the rest of it. These things did actually happen in the Roman world. It's true, but Prasutagus entered into this as well. And he basically said, look, you know, on my death, half of the land is to be given to Rome, and half of the land is to be ruled over by my wife. And then you forget about the first bit that you've said, the agreement bit, because historians go on the next bit and they basically said, actually, the Romans should have honoured the agreement for Boudica to have actually had half the land. But then the historians then argue she's a woman. The Romans would not enter into a contract with a woman. However, that is contradicting everything I've said with Cartimandua. There's something not right in that contract, that bit of the story. So when we do Boudica, we know that there's something not quite right already. It's not echoing right. Andy.
Sorry, yeah, I was wondering with the maps that the Briganti area is shown in some of them as not including South Cumbria, and in others it's including Cumbria.
Yes.
I was led to believe from archaeological evidence that's been found, well, fairly recently, that it did include this area. But
the thing is that there's something that can be said with that. We don't really know everything about these. tribal landscapes. What the Romans basically said, they said these people are there, those people are there, and these people are there. This is the way the Romans did things, right? There may have been small tribal people up in North Cumbria. There may have been weird tribal people down in the Barrow-in-Furness area. They may have been little tribes all over the shop, right? And then the umbrella tribal people, the Brigantes, it makes it easier for historians to write about this from a Roman point of view. We defeated the Brigantes, or we took the Brigante kingdom from east to west. You know, forgetting all these other little tribes who were actually pro-Roman or anti-Roman, or didn't really, in the eyes of Rome, didn't exist. So it's really difficult to work out that map.
Yeah.
When history's not being properly documented or is being written after the fact, we only get what we know, and it's very dangerous to rely upon the written historical evidence from Roman historians to actually paint the history. And we've got to look at, Andy so rightly said, we've got to look at the archaeology to understand the story a little bit better.
Really good. She was obviously well hard. That's what frightened them.
According to the Romans, she was treacherous and wanton.
She would be wanton, wouldn't she?
She was what? Yeah,
she's got red hair.
If it had been a man, she'd have been heroic, wouldn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She was wanting something. Right. So, and somebody said that's another Jackanory. Right. So,
yeah.
Right. So, talking about Jackanory, Anne, we've got two cats fighting here now.
No, thank you. I found it quite interesting. I came in a bit late, and as I say, I found it quite hard to absorb. There was a lot there.
And there's even more to absorb after the break, because we'll go to what the writer Armitage says. Right. Thank you very much. And we'll have a normal 15-minute break. I'm going to have a bit of the Barra bread.
Oi!
Hang on a minute. I haven't closed it yet. Hang on a minute. Right. We'll have a break now. Oh, sorry, Margaret. Go for it.
Apart from handing Caraticus over to the Romans,
yes.
What else did Cartimandua do to secure peace for the Brigantes? Was she doing trade with them? Was there any coinage found?
We're not getting issuing of Brigante coinage in the same as there's some on the periphery there, but however, I think it's more along the line. Like, when you think about it, the Romans have got to try to control the whole of southern England and Cymru, Wales and Cornwall, and they've got all those resources. They don't have enough personnel over here. Keeping a Roman army in Britain is very expensive. When the Romans got to deal with the Germanic frontier, they've got to deal with rebellions across the Roman Empire. They've got to deal with the Eastern Roman frontier. They've got to deal with those damnable Jews at Masada by the AD 70s, and there's constant Jewish rebellions as well. And I say that with a smile on my face, because the story about the Jewish rebellions in Masada is fascinating. We've got lots of documentary evidence for that. So in other words, what we're looking at is the Romans really struggled to keep their empire in check. And did you know that if you look at there's two issues here. The Roman army itself was no more than about 26 legions, right? No more than about ever 30, and each legion had about 6,000 men. And we've then got 6,000 auxiliaries, and the Romans actually did have a type of police force as well. But however, the Romans, if we work out the mathematics, the Romans have got a large empire to keep in check with a relatively small army, right? And if there's any pressures in the Roman Empire, they're really in trouble. And to have more than 3 or 4 Roman legions in Britain was extremely uneconomical and extremely difficult to keep in check. And they needed not to conquer the north if they could have conquered the north, but they would not have been able to keep control of it. And they needed to take Britain bit by bit, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. So it's an issue that by keeping Cartimandua where she was in power, like where you could assimilate this with Mussolini in 1943 when the when the fascist party of Italy voted Mussolini no longer head of the Italian state, and then Adolf Hitler sent his Fallschirmjäger in to try and rescue Mussolini to keep him in control, right? It's better to have, if that's a metaphor, right? So if we take they needed to keep him there, if we want to use that as a metaphor in the 1940s. Equally, the Romans needed to keep Cartimandua there and to support her. Whether they wanted a woman in charge or not, it served their purposes, and they knew she wasn't going to live forever. And
but was
that's
it about
basically
60 years later when Hadrian's Wall was built? The Brigantes were the enemy by then, so everything had gone pear-shaped, I presume, after Cartimandua.
Now, the Hadrian's Wall, that's a really interesting concept. By what we've got the Stain Gate by about 8 AD 80, and we've got that, which is basically the road that runs east to west, where the Hadrian's Wall frontier would then be erected by AD 120. And the one thing about that is that the Romans already set the frontier by AD 80 that temporarily, and by having Hadrian's Wall is both a defensive frontier to defend against the south and the north, which is quite a strange concept. It's also a customs gate. It's also Hadrian's Wall doesn't work as a defensive frontier against people in the north. It also defends as a frontier to people in the south, i.e. the Brigantes. It also works as a customs gate. In fact, Hadrian's Wall works both ways. It's yeah, it's quite an odd one, Hadrian's Wall. I never look at Hadrian's Wall as being a frontier between south and north, but that's my clue. Anyway, so we're gonna have a break now. It's 8:26. We need to be back at 8:40, right? Because we need to try and wrap this up by not too late tonight. So obviously that's why we start early. So go on, go away and get something to eat and drink.
Okay then.
Right, I need a tea.
Actually, I think I'll try one of my bergamots with the drop of honey.
Oh, yeah. Good.
If you put anything in it, it ruins it. But honey might be good.
I reckon so.
Yeah, I need a wee. So while you're here, I have to go upstairs. I couldn't tell the water lady that I didn't flush the devil.
Just in case I can hear, yeah. Oh, right, okay, yeah.
Ah.
Oh, look at that cat. Did you wash that?
All right, I've got my...
Hi, Janice.
Oh, hi, Anne.
Didn't get here last week, so I'm pleased to be here with you.
I was going to give you that name for the book
All right.
while you're there. Just 1 second.
Have you got it? Oh, I've got a piece of paper and a pen. I'll write it down.
There we are. Yeah, the guy's name is Philip Marsden.
Wait a minute. Oh, no, my pen's not writing. Oh,
That's always the
I've
way,
got
isn't it?
I've got another one. Philip Marston.
Marsden, Marsden.
Yeah.
And the book's called Under a Metal Sky.
Yeah. Marsden. Write that a bit more carefully. Right. Thank you very much.
It's really good. Yeah. I was completely taken up this afternoon reading that book you lent me yesterday.
You enjoying it?
Absolutely. It's brilliant. Yeah.
And me, I felt
Yeah.
I was very impressed with the whole thing. It really made it's made a difference to my life and thinking almost. I think, yeah, I'm not saying in a massive way, but it really was a life-changing book.
Yeah, and it brought together all sorts of other things that I've read in the past, and I like his style. He's very optimistic,
Yes.
bright sort of guy.
There's
I
what
like
you
that.
can do about it rather than sit and grumble, really. Wasn't
Yes,
that
exactly.
kind of book?
Yes, very positive. Yeah, yeah.
Who's that you're talking about? I've just arrived.
Oh, Anne lent me a book yesterday, which is really about sort of positive thinking as you get older.
Yeah.
And I was reading it this afternoon, and
What's the
it
author?
is very good. It's called, hang on, the author is one Daniel Levitin.
Levitin,
yeah, spelt exactly as it sounds.
Well, Anne's always very positive, I think.
Yes, exactly.
Isn't she? Is that
Yeah.
because you've read that book, Anne, or are you just
No, it's made me more positive. I've taken up now what do you call it? Meditation.
Oh, goodness me.
Very positive for your old age, evidently, and builds this chap who's wrote this is a neuroscientist.
What's the book called?
The book, what was it called? Can you remember, Janice?
Oh yeah, it's in front of me. It's called The Changing Mind.
Yeah. And it includes a lot of what I've read before about lifestyle and the kind of thing that helps you to be positive and do well and live well in old age.
Mm.
And but it had very positive tips. I mean, I've read a lot of them before, but there were new things, and I really quite enjoyed it. And the whole thing
And
was,
how do you cope with living alone?
you make sure you have a social life.
Yes.
What was your
That's his main thing. A social life is so important.
Yeah.
You must, if you can possibly. The worst thing is being if you can't get out and stuck in. It can be really harmful to your well-being, and which I knew before, but he was stressing it even more in this book.
What was your surname?
Levitin. Levitin.
I don't know about you. I don't know if you read all the first part of the book. I found the first part quite nerdy.
Yes, it is. But then so am I.
Really difficult to get through.
Yeah,
But
it's okay.
But as I say, part 2 and 3 I found very positive about not just learning about the process, but things you should be looking to. I thought it was absolutely super book. I got quite excited about this book. I do occasionally.
So
I also like your penciled notes in the margin. They were good.
They weren't mine.
Were they not yours?
No, they were not mine. I don't write on books.
If
I was making notes, they'd be separate. But it's in the library here. I was surprised to find. I was really surprised to find it, because most of it's sort of just all, novels and that kind of thing.
I noticed that.
Very little of. But so whoever had put it there had made notes. Possibly somebody.
I had indeed. Yes.
Probably somebody who lives here or has lived here. I should think. But the fact that it's there.
Yeah.
But also, you'd think it's a good place to have it where I live.
Excellent. Oh, yes, indeed. Yeah.
For all us old people striving to keep ourselves going in the best way we can.
I'm coming round to you. I'm taking Joyce out to the charity shop tomorrow.
Yes.
Joyce at number 13.
That's right.
She phoned me up. She's still sorting out all her belongings. She said, would I
got the decorators in today?
He said she was going to,
would I take some things to the charity shop? And she said maybe we can have a coffee or lunch somewhere, because she hasn't. Have you still got your car?
Yes.
Yeah, she has.
But I'm planning on getting rid of it.
I know.
In the not too distant future, which will be a bit of a problem for some things. But I found I've got a bus timetable for all the buses of the area, and I thought found it out and looked at it, but it's well out of date. So I've got to see if they still do them, because I think that would be really useful to have. Because then you know which bus goes where, and you could be able to connect them up.
Yeah.
If you wanted to use buses. The problem is buses. The trains are fine from where I am. I mean, just down the road. And from this village, they're fine. That you've got trains that you can get in some directions, but obviously trains don't go the same way as buses, and they can't get into where the places can. But the buses are relatively useless.
I've been using the trains a lot more, but they're not very reliable.
No, they're trying to they're getting worse.
Yeah, I've had my bus pass since I was old enough, and I've never used it.
I know. I had a bus pass where I lived before. The village I used before, I had this bus pass, and there weren't any buses. And I've got another bus pass here, and there still aren't any buses. They're a bit pointless in some places, aren't they?
Well, I've got a relative who lives in St Helens, and she uses it all the time, because she can use it on some of the local trains, not just the buses and things. It really does depend where you live.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you can use them if you can find a bus that'll go in where you want. This is why I thought I'd study the bus. So how you can connect between buses, that's the thing. And when I was looking it up on Google and trying to find out, they kept saying, "Well, which bus number do you want?" Well, I don't know which bus, because I don't know where they go. And until I can find out, and there may be the connections that can be, which would make it feasible. It takes a lot longer than a car, but nevertheless, if you could get there, that would be okay.
The thing is,
It gets really bad when you put the numbers down for the bus in a book.
They've got
there just aren't enough buses.
the book that I got was one that the council produced of all the buses in the area, so you could find your way around. Well, I thought that was really fun, but
I don't think that counts from 1940, love.
Oh,
I'm going to say I doubt if. I doubt. Well, it wasn't that old, but it's bad enough. And I'm wondering if they still, if they've had to cut back on everything because nobody's got any money, whether they're actually producing them now. So I've got to ring up and find out.
I know Adrina's complaining about the trains, but the problem is that the beach-in lines were cut a few years ago.
Shame that. Yeah, it was a shame that all.
I tell you what, there were some brilliant train lines across Britain, and
yeah, what a shame.
I think the figures either they cut 2/3 or 1/3, one or the other. It was quite shocking.
It's a huge amount, wasn't it, when it happened? Yeah,
it was, and lots of the train lines are thinking, oh, it'd be great if they were still in use, and most of the land is not there anymore. It's either built upon or it's been seized. Right, so we've got to do the next part now. So let's get on to it. Otherwise, somebody, everybody's going to start to go on strike. Oh, mate, there's my Baldric. Doesn't he look lovely? Lovely. I got to do a Baldric video soon.
It is very beautiful.
He is very beautiful, and the only reason David wants to meet up with me is because he wants me to bring Baldric along. That's what it is. So I haven't had a card off Baldric for his birthday for a while, David. So you have to make sure you send one up. So now the next bit. The next bit we got a little bit of an audience online, so that's good. So I can't really communicate with them, but yeah, but they're still there. Judith is still there as well. We've got to mention her. Right, so let's crack on with where we were. So we've got to get on to the author's work in a few moments, and I think I just got to work out. Right, okay. So this is basically capturing the situation at the point that we mentioned. And if I can get the right text, right, this is the one. This is the one, and we're going to start there. So we left at AD 57. Cartimandua retained her throne thanks to prompt military support from the 9th Hispanic Legion under the governorship of Aulus Didius Gallus. And again, these are all listed in my book, The Romans in South Wales. But Tacitus wrote the following: she grew to despise her husband Venetius, and took as her consort his squire Velicatus in AD 51, whom she admitted to share the throne with her. Her house was at once shaken by this scandalous act. Now, remember, this is a Roman writing about this after the event, some years. Her husband was favoured by the sentiments of all the citizens. Now, I think that's very interesting. I think the Romans are putting that from their own point of view. Is a bloke, we understand that in Rome, not in Britain, that people would want a male to be their leader, whether this is actually the case. I doubt that, because we've got female leaders, quite a lot of them in Britain. The adulterer was supported by the Queen's passion for him and by her savage spirit. So in other words, they were a good match. But so we got Velicatus and the likes of Cartimandua were basically well chosen together. So Venetius, the ex-husband, before AD 50, well, after AD 51, calling in aid from outside and at the same time assisted by a revolt of the Brigantes themselves. But Cartimandua put Cartimandua into an extremely dangerous position. This is now up to AD 57. Then she asked the Romans for protection. And in fact, some companies of Roman foot and horse were sent after meeting with indifferent success in a number of engagements. Finally succeeded in rescuing the queen from danger. The throne was left to Venetius, the war to us. So not really sure what that means, but in other words, what we've got is that Cartimandua, his position was saved, but some power was seen to be in the hands of Venetius at that stage. Tacitus refers to Cartimandua leaving her consort of Velicatus as scandalous. Now, I think one of you mentioned that. He also discusses how Venetius rallies against her, but fails after she secures aid from the Romans. So in other words, if it wasn't for the Romans, Cartimandua would not have remained in command of the Brigantes. And the interesting thing is, if Cartimandua had been removed from the throne and Venetius was anti-Roman, would the events have been different in regards to the Boudica rebellion, in that they would have been aided by the Brigantes in AD 60, AD 61, because there was somebody else on the throne who was anti-Roman and not the pro-Roman Cartimandua. Now, again, lots to be said about this, and lots to be said about the whole story and how this all works. Cartimandua was not so successful after the point of AD 57, because she was constantly reliant upon the Romans. And the one thing that was happening was that Cartimandua faced the year AD 69, and this was the year of instability. This was the year of Nero's assassination. This was the year of the 4 emperors, including the one emperor known as Vespasian, who would then eventually rule. And in that year, AD 69, Venetius, if we want to go back to the chart, Venetius staged another revolt against Cartimandua. Cartimandua appealed for troops from the Romans, who were only able to send supporting troops, not legionaries. Cartimandua was evacuated, leaving Venetius in control of a kingdom at war with Rome. After this, Cartimandua disappears from the sources. So in other words, what happens is this, that we've got another bit of text to look at in a few moments. So in other words, the story starts to get a bit weird between 57, AD 57. You've got the rebellion of Boudica, where, in other words, Cartimandua is sort of in more or less control of the territory of the Brigantes, but there's a little bit going on with Venetius. But she was the one supported by the Romans, by the 9th Hispanic Legion, based at Lincoln. And the rebellion dies out by AD 61, led by Boudica. But what happens is that in the year AD 69, there's a lot of insecurity in the Roman Empire. Nero's assassinated, as we said, and Venetius takes advantage and gains control of the territory of the Brigante territory. So now what's happening, if we go to that map, so what's happening is that the whole of this area by AD 69 is back in the hands of Venetius. Venetius is anti-Roman, and now the Romans are going to have to face these people in the north. But they eventually quell the rebellion in the north, because it's no longer being led by the friendly Cartimandua. Now, with all of that said, what we really need to do is we need to go and see what this author says about the situation. And let's look at this author's point of view. And it starts off with Jill Armitage asking the following question. And we'll go over some of the stuff that we've already done. So in other words, Anne saying that we've got a lot to take on today. So we're gonna revisit some of this stuff and some more images. And Jill Armitage writes in December 2019, obviously associated with the book, "Why has history overlooked Cartimandua? Why? Why? This is everyone talks about Boudica. They talk about Elizabeth I, and why don't we talk about Cartimandua as being this great female, this great woman that was really in control of this territory and resisted her husband and took control and all these other things? Mention the name Cartimandua and people look blank. Do we look blank? Do we today? You guys, there's 9 of us all together, and including Judith and the ones online. How many of you knew the name Cartimandua? How many of you understood the name Cartimandua? No. Now, this in a way, Cartimandua is the first major leader, a female leader of the Britons, to actually be mentioned by contemporary historians like Tacitus. She is the one who will eventually be written down in history being the precursor to Boudica. This is the one that they look at first before Boudica, right? So in other words, that question from Margaret, I think it was, or one of you asked the question, was Cartimandua afraid of repercussions upon her because of what happened to Boudica? No, because Cartimandua existed within her own right well before Boudica, being the queen of the great Briganti tribe. Now, when we think of this great tribal organization, when you again, if you forget Wales is there, this territory in the north and including the Parisa, you've mentioned about Cumbria. If it was all of that northern chunk there, if it was all of that area, that's a sixth of or fifth or sixth of the area of England in control of one individual, right? So the geographer Ptolemy, writing in the 100s, this is after the death of Cartimandua, Ptolemy wrote that the control of the Brigantes and the Queen stretched from east to west, and again all the way south to Derbyshire. So this is the area that we're talking about. Obviously he didn't write about Derbyshire, wrote about the area. So to understand this again from the point of view of this historian who's written this wonderful book, Jill Armitage, let's maybe change some of our images, and which are these images here. And what did Venetius look like? We will look at Venetius again. It's like something out of the Lord of the Rings, to be honest with you. But let's keep her husband in view. Now, he looks like he's got red hair, doesn't he, as well? 2 red heads together, that must have been an absolute nightmare. So they must have been always fighting, always roused. And if you look at this is a better understanding of the area that was seemingly controlled by the likes of the Brigantes. So when Cartimandua, to many, is a largely unknown figure, but now we're understanding here in this presentation today, and other people will get that as well. She played a central player in the drama of the Roman annexation of Britain after AD 43. And can I just basically whisper that maybe before AD 43, because we don't know where she stood before AD 43, right? What she was doing, if she may have, as I said, she may have already really been in charge of this area in the north by AD 43, by the time of the Romans invading Britain. And there were tribes in Britain, parts of the Atrebatoi tribe, for example, in the south, that were pro-Roman. And this may have been a pro-Roman people that basically said, look, boys, we've got no objection with you invading Britain. Come on over, right? A really good point there when we think about this. When we think about AD 43, at the time, Britain, in the eyes of the Romans, were divided into 33 tribal groupings, each with its own individual kingdom or title or leader. This is how the Romans saw Britain. This is not the real story, but part of the real story is that the Brigantes were a big territorial people, and the Atrebates and the Catavalane and the Cante people and the Iceni people and the Demete people, but not so much the other peoples in Britain, for example, in Cumbria, Wales and Scotland and Ireland. So this was a time of immense change. This was a time, and again, look at that map there. This is huge. This is basically more another author saying that this is actually what the Brigantes did control. So, as Andy said, you can't really work out what's going on. So this, however, was a time of immense change, the merging of the old and new worlds, the new millennium, and that goes back to what I've already said. If for example, the Brigantes themselves were pro-Roman, they were obviously in that because they had Roman goods. They had Roman trade goods, and they understood the Roman world. And maybe it's a world to get involved in, to be enlightened. A period of enlightenment, maybe the Renaissance of Italy in the 1400s, or the Risorgimento of Italy in the 1850s, 1860s, that sort of thing. That there's illumination, the sense of people in Central and South America as they become as they moved away from the indoctrinated Spanish and Portuguese world. They were enlightened by looking outwards to become people in their own right. So there's lots of things going on. So in AD 43, Roman general Publius Ostorius Scapula invaded Britain under a command that was also led by the likes of Claudius. Now I'm in an hour over that, but elephants and statues of Lloyd George got him in there eventually. But this is, in so many ways, the word Celtic and barbarian and so on is a word that the Romans are defining us as, and this is me putting the word in the right context now. That the Romans are seeing us as these Celts, when in fact we are the Britons. Again, let's just let that word flow. We were definitely not barbarians, and this is what our author today is saying, Jill Armitage. We were definitely not barbarians. I completely agree with that. They were inexcusably to be seen as people who had a ferocious reputation, in many ways more than most. The Romans write about peoples in Britain. Eventually, they write about peoples in Britain wearing blue dye called woad and hurling themselves without fear into the conflict. But that was based upon what they would say about any people that opposed Roman rule. But that's something that would come up in our later discussions about Rome anyway. Is it true to say that these people in Britain lacked in military skill? Any lack in military skill they made it with bloodthirsty ferocity. I'm not really sure I agree or that's completely true, because Boudicca did pretty well in kicking and destroying one complete Roman legion, right, and damaging another one and making another Roman legion run away. So I wouldn't agree with that. But Cartimandua needed support of the Romans, which points towards their maybe that some leaders weren't brilliant. However, Boudicca was. Cartimandua and her elders watched and waited as the Roman legions invaded the south. She called together other tribal leaders and they debated whether to unite or go south to fight or wait. Now, the Roman war machine, and we're talking about the site of Stanwix, which is in the center of our territory, which is just actually that around that red dot there. That's where Stanwix is. We think about this, and it's just like, should this leader, should this wonderful woman, Cartimandua, and it's seen that any woman that resists Rome has got red hair, right? So there you go. Any if I want to do this as a metaphor, any woman that resists a man, so the British world was a woman's world, right? Red hair. Anyone who would resist a man is obviously not with red hair, and they're obviously the Romans. That's basically it. That's the only way to look at it. So Cartimandua and her elders watched and waited. If the Roman legions defeated this tribe and that tribe in the south, you know, the people of Kent, the Cantiaci and the Catavolani, led by Caraticus, for example, or one of the Caraticuses, well, going back to the idea that there were several of them, would they be content with the richer land and the wealth of the more compliant southern kingdoms, or would they turn their attention further north? Now, Cartimandua had already made her own mind up, right? This is AD 51. It was probably likely that because her husband Venetius was anti-Roman, he basically thought, right, I'll go into bed with another person, and that person is pro-Roman. So I'm going to be pro-Roman. I'm going to lose all my territory. Let's just like what's happening in the south. Let's be pro-Roman. And luckily, she got away with it. She kept getting away with it. And this is the strange story. Boudica did not get away with it at all, but she did. And this is the point. This is the yin and yang. So the Roman authorities believed in the this is another way of portraying her, right? The Roman authorities believed in their right by might, but not over Cartimandua. That lesser people should be subject to them or exterminated. I'm not really sure that you're going to get that from me. That's not exactly true, but maybe some authors might say that. And the tribal land of defiant tribes who resisted the Romans were scorched, making them unfit for habitation. That idea has come from what happened to Carthage in the sacking of Carthage. And the last Carthaginian war, where the city of Carthage, that this is over 200 years before. Nobody was able to live there because the land was salted, all the trees were burnt, and everything was felled across the entire landscape of Carthage, meaning that nobody could actually live there anymore. But that's not really what Cartimandua is experiencing. So the Roman leader Agricola was praised for the almost total slaughter of the Ordovician people, and news of his thoroughness travelled before him. So these are the people of West Wales. How much of that is fact or fiction is difficult to say, but by AD 47, things were changing. Queen Cartimandua looked for signs from the gods, but the gods did not stop the Roman armies advancing north or west or east. The sheer number of the troops and the splendor of their arms and armor, as thousands of men marching across the countryside in orderly columns, would have been an impressive though terrifying sight to their enemies. Now, earlier on, does this conflict with what I said earlier on? I said earlier on that maybe this army itself is, but when you think about it, that I don't know, that's over 6,000 men there, and probably a lot more than that. Now, could you imagine that coming towards you, and 3 of these legions in Britain, even though in Britain we're talking about in excess of 40,000 Roman soldiers, that is a large army, but supporting a large army that size, again, it is a lot of work, right? But when you think about it, there's several million people living in Britain, so surely they could resist the Romans. The answer is no, because most people worked on the land. There weren't standing British armies. So By AD 47, Agricola and his vast armies were on the very edge of Briganti territory. They had fought their way north, and a new Roman province lay south of the Trent Severn line, its boundary marked by the Fosse Way. And let me show you what this looked like. Right, let's go. Let's get one of my maps earlier on. I should have one of these lined up ready, but it's easy for me to do. The Fosse Way is basically, here we go, easy. This is an easy one. The Fosse Way is there, and that's it. So in other words, everything north of that is non-Roman, everything south of that is Roman, and we're talking about that looking at AD 43. So there was no reason why at that stage the Romans need to go north, but Agricola may have been ready to bring the weight of the Roman armies into the territory of the Brigantes or Brigantia. You got that there? Interesting. So in other words, Britannia comes from the words Brigantes, Brigantia. So there we go. So in other words, Queen Cartimandua's territory is the territory that survived to give the name to the future land that we know as Britannia or Brigantes. It's all linked in one. Queen Cartimandua was a strong practical leader. Rather than fighting the invading force, she negotiated to preserve the people's tribal independence without bloodshed. Boudica did the same thing, but it didn't work. But for her, in AD 57, it did. Now, instead of, I hope it was Margaret who mentioned this thing about, maybe what happened is that Boudica thought that she could do the same as Cartimandua. Right, but it didn't work because the Romans didn't like Boudica. She didn't look right. Obviously, her hair was the wrong color. Jokes aside, there's something very different in regards to the Iceni. And this is in fact, when we're talking about AD 47, right? You're talking about a whole decade and a half before Boudica and a rebellion, or by a year, comes into play. So the Brigantian tribes of Derbyshire, Lancashire, Cumberland, and Yorkshire united to become a client kingdom of Rome. So in other words, those tribal people that existed within, for example, let's get the map up, all of this area, these little sub-tribes and stuff got together to be called the Brigantes, and this is what the Romans called them. Any other tribal name people within this area, that was gone, right? They was all called the Brigantes. And they were controlled by diplomacy, not war. The Romans, I don't really think that the Romans could have really have captured this whole territory, right? I don't think they could have done it because they just didn't have the men to do that at that stage. So Cartimandua's collaboration would allow her to administer her own area as long as tributes were paid to Rome, recruits were provided for the army, and slaves were always available. Now, this is that thing, right? Cartimandua was basically playing the game. She played the game completely, right? She rolled over and said, "Here I am, Rome." Or is that true? Or did the Romans actually think she was a strong leader? Don't mess with Cartimandua. It's really difficult to try and work out the dynamics of this guy, Venetius. But obviously, Cartimandua by AD 51, this is why she got rid of her husband. It became a practical Emperor Claudian policy to have pro-Roman kingdoms flanking its boundaries. But sadly, not everyone agreed with Cartimandua's compromise, and the greatest anti-Roman hostility for Cartimandua came from her husband Venetius. Can you imagine the argument between these two? They're both redheads. I'm sure she would have given a run for her money against her husband, right? And so in AD 48, Roman troops from Cheshire had to be sent, which is Cheshire, which is Diva, which is Chester. That would be the, I think that would be the, that's the 20th Valley of Vitrix Legion, because the 2nd Augustus Legion is at that stage based in Exeter, not Calais. So the 20th Valley of Vitrix based at Chester, that was sent, as we've already said, in this sort of AD 47, AD 48 to shore up Cartimandua's position. Now, this is back to the story. This is back to what's the story, Morning Glory. This is back to this again. This is back to this. So so what her loyalty to Rome was tested to the full when in AD 51, Caratacus, the former leader of, is it both the Catavalani people? Is it this other leader from South Wales, or is it just the same person? That's something else. Fled into Brigantia seeking political asylum after military defeat by the Romans. Unlike Cartimandua, Caratacus had chosen to fight the Romans right from the start, but fearing for the safety of the people, Cartimandua handed him over to the Romans. And when we do questions in about 10 minutes, I want one of you to shout out Cartimandua did the right thing or she did the wrong thing. Just one of you can do that. The first person I ask. Her enemies considered this an act of treachery, but the Roman authorities rewarded Cartimandua with great wealth and favors. So in other words, this is a lot more at play. This is political. The Romans saw it was far more important to have Caratacus as a captured ex-leader of the Britons than it was to take over Cartimandua's territory, the Brigantes. And now we can get an idea what's going on in the Romans' minds. They were more interested in this figurehead Caratacus than it was to capture more of Britain. That's a really important point. So Venetius, Cartimandua's husband, organized a palace coup, and again, Roman troops were sent to restore Cartimandua to the throne. According to the Roman writer Tacitus, Cartimandua lost her husband but preserved her kingdom. Or you could say morally the other way round, depending which way you want to look at it. Now, we've only got a little bit more to look at now, and let's just try and fit these pieces in. So when we do Boudica, you can really get into the Boudica story. But when we do the Boudica story, we're not going to do the rebellion itself, because that's part of the whole Roman stuff that I'll be doing in the near future. So Venetius is constantly at war. Let's get back to Venetius. There he is. Oh, hang on a minute. And there she is again. So we got Venetius. So there's Venetius. Throughout the AD 50s and 60s, the Roman legions were hovering on the borders of the territory of the Brigantes. And you can tell that if you look at that there. The 6th Legion is based at Baracum. Lincoln's got there we go, down Lincoln there. That's got the Roman, that's got the 9th Legion. So you've got the Legion of the 6th at Baracum. You've got the, against eventually some elements of the 9th Legion do move to York, but that's not yet. So Lincoln, this is all in the 50s and 60s. Lincoln has got the 9th Hispana. You've got the 20th Valley of Vitrix at, for example, Chester. So all across this territory, it's bounded by Roman military troops, except from the north. But then again, you could say that the Roman Navy could have provided that. So obviously, what we've got there is that Queen Cartimandua fell for the charms of Velicatus in AD 51, as we know, and obviously this whole thing, everything going on. Everything happening by AD 69, Velicatus and Cartimandua is expunged from the territory of the Brigantes by her former husband Venetius, and she was never to be seen again. Now this is really, really important. Now. So what's happening is the anti-Roman party triumphed to gain control of this territory in AD 69. Venetius was now undisputed leader of the Briganti tribe and bitterly anti-Roman. Now, Venetius was now up against the entire Roman Empire. by himself. And he thought he could resist the Romans. He was to make a big, big mistake. It was only then that the Romans made the decision to invade, conquer, and absorb the territory of the Brigantes. Despite all Cartimandua's efforts up until AD 69, the Brigantia, the territory of the Brigantes, became part of the vast Roman Empire, and the armies went on to conquer the north as far as the Scottish Highlands. It makes you wonder, and maybe one of you can give your own penneth on this. It makes you wonder if Cartimandua had retained the territory of the Brigantes in AD 69, would the Romans have invaded? And that's the question, yay or nay. Very difficult there. Sadly, the courageous queen of the Brigantes, who had faced the Roman invasion with such determination, has not found a rightful place in our history books. And what we're going to do, we're going to mention this book. And if anyone wants to get this book by Jill Armitage, I would thoroughly recommend it. Let's just read this in her own words. This is Jill Armitage. Celtic Queen, the world of Cartimandua follows the life of Cartimandua through contemporary writers and examines archaeological evidence and Celtic finds. It locates the hill forts that would have been Cartimandua's headquarters. It gives many references to popular Celtic culture, living conditions, their gods, beliefs, art, and symbolism, presenting an intriguing insight into the life of this fascinating woman and the Celtic Roman world in which she lived. And finally, here we go. If you want to take notice of that title there, Celtic Queen, the World of Cartimandua. Jill Armitage is an English photojournalist who has written numerous historic books. Celtic Queen, the World of Cartimandua is her latest book and was published on the 15th of January 2020 by Amberley Publishing. And maybe if you want to get an idea of what this is all about and the subtext of a book. So if we can go to the title of the book now. So there we go. We've got these images. Let's go back to the subtext there, the title of the book. That's the book you need to get hold of. In a small print at the top says, praise for the author, 4 queens and a countess. Jill Armitage cuts through the tangled 16th century politics. I hate that 1500s politics when they say 16th century, 1500s politics, to create an incisive, clear narrative and an engaging and knowledgeable read. And on the Tudor trail. So what they're saying is that Cartimandua was seen to maybe be associated with Queen Elizabeth I and sort of a precursor to Queen Elizabeth I. We're breaking through that and we're untangling that weave to really understand what this wonderful Cartimandua was like. And finally, just one more time, looking at the face of Cartimandua herself. No, we did not go back in time and take a photograph of her, but if she looked like this, I'm sure I wouldn't have messed with her. God, I wouldn't have. Right, okay then, nightmare look. So there we go. Let's go over to questions. So I did ask a question earlier on, so let's go, I guess, go directly to Drina and then David number 1. So Drina, what's your responses? Did she do the right thing or the bad thing? Answer that question, please.
I think she probably did the right thing. She's saving people's lives.
Yes.
And hers.
Yeah.
I'm disappointed. Does her history just stop then when the Romans save her, as it were? Does it just disappear?
I think she falls out of history AD 69. Maybe there is more to that story.
Yeah.
But she falls out of history. She's not important enough for the Romans to write about her. And you've actually just answered that. She's a woman.
Yeah.
The Romans didn't like women, and she had served the Romans' purposes. She was no longer good enough for the Romans to write about. So that answers that question.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
This is now no longer a matriarchal society in Britain. It ends in AD 69. The matriarchal sense of Britain disappeared until Queen Elizabeth I, and then we see it returning in the reign of Queen Anne, and then we see it returning with the likes of Queen Elizabeth II. So
Okay.
There we go.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Trina. Right, David, anything you want to say, my lovely?
No, thank you.
Thank you
I
very much.
share with
Go on.
Rina. All right, good night all.
Bye.
No,
Hi,
no, no,
David.
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 Bye.
No, no, David. No, 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 no. Thank you for joining us, David. Right, Janice.
I'm not sure she did do the right thing, because in the end,
Okay. Two women fighting in the mud over this. Right, Trina, you've had your say. Let's have Janice. Let's have it. Let's have it large. Come on.
well, in the end, the people died anyway. She put it off. She certainly put it off for a while. But in the end, it didn't make any difference.
And in a way, it wouldn't have made any difference.
No.
I said that at the beginning.
You did.
That's my actually if we look at the scenarios, try and get to what you said there, right? So if Cartimandua had joined Boudica, right, and Boudica and Cartimandua had failed against the Romans, which it's unlikely they would have failed. I think they would have succeeded. The Romans may have invaded again. It would have been a very bloody thing. So Cartimandua in the end would have ended up on the wrong side. Maybe the Romans could have abandoned Britain for good. We don't know. Going back to the other thing, if the Romans had never invaded Britain, Cartimandua had probably done the same thing anyway. It's a very difficult thing when we look at this whole Roman thing. If say for example you look at the Second World War, I said this. The reason why I said it, there's a real good reason. So many people looking at the Second World War always think, oh, there was a way that the Romans could have won, not the Romans could have won the Second World War. There was a way that the Germans could have won the Second World War, or that and I've looked at this so many times. There's no way the Germans could have won the Second World War after they invaded Poland. There was no way they were going to win it in any scenario, right? So that's a clear-cut piece of history. The clear-cut piece of history is that Britain would have gone along the same tangent with or without the Romans, right? And you're right in what you've said. Whether she sided with the Romans or not, she was eventually putting it off, because on her death, the Romans would have conquered the territory of the Brigantes anyway. So that is to be said. So she's a massively important figure.
Oh, yeah.
And she should not be forgotten as being a massively important figure. She's massively influential. She shows the way to go. But the question is, did she do the right thing or not? We've both got one take from Drina and Janice. So you're saying no. Drina said yes. That's fine. That's fair enough. Anything else, Janice?
No. Just it's
good.
The only other thing is she was written out of history because, as you said, the Romans didn't choose to write about her anymore. She wasn't important to them, and they did all the writing for centuries. So yeah, they could make people disappear. Yeah,
and they did make people disappear. The difference between the question is, why didn't they make Boudica disappear? They could not let Boudica disappear because Boudica was the warning, right? If you rebel against Rome, this is what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen to you. What happened to Boudica, right? Yeah. But also, if we don't do the right thing in Britain, Camalodunum, Londinium, and Verulamium are going to be burnt down by somebody like Boudica again. You could not forget Boudica at all. So Boudica remained in history. Cartimandua was written out. However, if you there is a coin. The Romans did issue a coin with the word in Britannia on it, right? It's in my head. I can see the coin. It says there's an image of Britannia and Britannia written underneath on a Roman coin, right? Is this Britannia referring to the Brigantes? And if so, is the person that they're referring to on the coin actually a representation of Cartimandua herself? Is Cartimandua actually on that coin? Is Cartimandua the coin that we've got, which is shown as Britannia on our coins for many hundreds of years, up until today?
Yeah.
Is it actually her? Did we forget her after all? Maybe we didn't.
Maybe not. That's the thought.
So there we go. Thank
Yeah.
you. There we go. Food for thought. Right, we'll have Emma and Richard in a minute, but before we have those two gobby people, we'll have Margaret.
Well, do you know, the thing that very first got me interested in archaeology was Cartimandua. I read a book about her. It must be 15 years ago. And I found it so fascinating, the story, because it's where my folks used to live. And but we've only got Tacitus's word for all of this, which was written much, much later. He was never even in Britain. So who did he get all the information from?
And writing Cartimandua out of history is also an interesting play on all of this. And it's not exactly true with what you've said in that all the information. We've got some archaeology from her in the fact that she existed, with locations and stuff. And the other, clearly in the archaeology, one thing that we can read in the archaeology is like a book. You don't have those destructive layers that you see in the south of places being burnt down. You don't see the level of that. And obviously there must have been a figure keeping the Romans at bay. The reason why the Romans didn't establish Eboracum until the time they did was because there was somebody holding them back. And it wasn't a military army holding them back. It was a diplomatic army holding them back. Right. And that's also borne out in the archaeology. But you are right in in a literature, in a sense of literacy. The literature tells us from Tacitus and Ptolemy and other writers. You are right in what you say, but also the archaeology bears out what Tacitus is saying.
But it could have been her husband that handed him over. Was she still with him?
And no, she wasn't.
Venutius, had he already left the scene?
Well, Venetius never left the scene. He was always lingering there, and you could say that the dates are quite apt. That the divorce with Venetius happens at the same time that Caratacus comes on the scene. So make of that as you will. Maybe that was the last, nail in the coffin for their marriage.
Well, I know that the books that I've read, Caratacus was taken over to Rome in handcuffs, and he was paraded along the streets of Rome, and he gave a magnificent speech, apparently, and so they let him free, and he lived the rest of his life out very peacefully and happily over in Rome.
But there are two other stories. There's another story a little bit after that. He was poisoned. The other one that he was free to go everywhere he wanted. He could stay in Rome. The other story that he returned back to South Wales, and that's actually in my book. So there's at least 3 or 4 stories,
But they said he was wicked because he left his wife and children behind. But nobody's saying what a dreadful man for leaving his wife and children. But Cartimandua was treacherous. It's just the way that the history is being written. You just don't know what to believe, do you?
Yeah, exactly. Caratacus, he was sentenced to death, but made a speech before his execution that persuaded the Emperor Claudius to spare him. So there's a lot. We don't really know what happened to Caratacus. It would have been a good idea to get rid of him, to be honest with you, but that's life. Here we go. Here's part of it. We don't know if this was Cornelius Tacitus. How does the speak? It goes, were I to have been at once delivered up as a prisoner, neither my fall nor my triumph would have become famous. And there's so much more to that, but we'll do that when we do to Caratacus. Right. Thank you very much, Margaret. Anything from the other David, Richard, David, and Emma now? Go on, quickly. Emma, you can hear my voice one more time this week.
You're muted.
You're muted. Emma, you're muted. See, you don't want to speak to me now. There you go. They've got a fan club, several of these women. Right. Anne, anything you want to say? Well,
there you
try
go.
and get them.
Yeah,
Oh, go on, Craig. Go on. You've only got a minute.
Sorry about that.
Do you want me to speak?
Yeah, speak
All
now.
right, okay.
Yeah, go on, speak on behalf of Karaticus.
I'm on.
Yeah, you're
Hello,
on.
You're on.
can you
Yeah,
hear
go
me?
on.
Yeah, go on,
All
go.
right.
Yes.
I think she was a remarkably intellectual woman, a negotiator, and highly intelligent. The way it was all handled, I've never heard of her before or Brigantia, so thanks for my lesson tonight.
Really. Yep. Go on.
Now I know a way of looking at the Roman invasion. Yeah, she was also attractive, which any bloke will pay attention to an attractive woman immediately they see her. So she wangled her way in with the Romans and had the intelligence and the foresight to amalgamate with them. And that's all I can say, really.
That's good. I appreciate that, and always here for people to learn. And there is one point about what you've just said. If that's everything from you, David and Emma, there is one thing about all of that. Everything that you said is correct, but which of that is lacking from Boudica, right? What did Boudica not have? But what did Boudica then have to take on Rome? And that's the big question.
She didn't have the intelligence. She was like a bull barging her way around.
Well, actually, no, that's most redheads, to be honest with you.
They raped her daughters.
And
so we're told, but
and she wasn't a negotiator either.
Now that could be key. That could be key. Maybe Boudica was not a negotiator, and maybe David keep that until we look at Boudica, because that will be something that we can look at there. And Margaret's reaction: the Romans raped her daughters. I'd see another source that the Romans may not have raped her daughters, but then again they slighted her daughters in whatever way, and that would have peed any red-headed woman off. I don't know, right? But there was something that Boudica, well, obviously, let's take it the other way around, Margaret. There's something that the Romans didn't like about Boudica, right? And if everything that David said is right, the Romans should have feared Cartimandua to get rid of her on everything that David said, and they didn't. So what did they fear from Boudica? And obviously this led to the rebellion. So those questions from another day, but don't answer them yet. Thank you, David and Emma. Thank you. Deep breath. Deep breath. Right. Finally, let's do Andy and Anne. Andy.
Yeah, I kind of think that she was probably right, simply because we only really know anything about any of these tribal leaders because of the Romans, and they only wrote about her and Boudica. So we don't know anything about any of the other ones, and there must have been dozens of them. So she did, despite being written out of history, she was also written in the first place, where the rest weren't even written in. So, she did buy a bit of space, but not for long. But
I would say it was
15 years, 16 years, wasn't it? So
yeah, it was 15 years. Yeah, that was good.
That's quite a long time. Yeah.
It is quite a long time, yeah. Considering if you want to compare that with the reigns of some kings in medieval Britain, that's with all the treachery in medieval Britain, which is going to come to 1,000+ years later. She did pretty well. And
the other thing is, of course, that she's way up north. And Boudica wasn't. So Boudica was where they wanted to be.
That north-south divide again.
Absolutely.
Oh, shut up. I knew that was coming.
Apart from being well hard.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe there were two.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. Maybe there's two types. Andy, this is it. Maybe there were two types of red-headed women back then. Today, there's only one.
I'm sure there
Cartimandua's
were many.
chariots had 4 wheels.
Maybe.
Oh well, yeah. Well, that goes without saying. What did the Romans ever do for us? Yeah, exactly. They had 4 wheels.
4 wheels and no roads to ride them on.
I don't know if the wheel had been
What's
invented.
new?
Oh, come on.
What's that? What's that, David?
I said, I wonder if the wheel had been invented
Yeah.
in that
Oh,
period.
yes.
Yeah, it had.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes, it
Yeah.
had. It
Although
was there.
they were back
was.
in Greek and Egyptian times, they were using chariots. So I presume we had
Yes,
these
they were.
Yeah,
big
we did.
wonky wheels made out. How they made them, I've no idea.
David, you should have joined us months ago. We looked at wheels in the Bronze Age in Britain.
Yeah.
Ah,
Yeah.
Ah, there you go. You see,
Yeah.
See, you've got to catch up, David. Go catch up. Janice
well,
knows.
I'm way
Catch up.
behind.
he needs to read your books, Carl.
Most of my history came from BBC programs.
Oh, well, forget them. It's the BBC.
Yeah.
Imperial stuff.
Right, okay. And the other thing is, if anyone wants a copy of Romans in South Wales, they need to let me know before you go. But before we do that, Anne, anything from you?
I would think it's difficult to know whether she's doing right or wrong, because I suppose politicians and a king or queen has to be a politician, whether they want to or not. They have to take the decisions that are political. And usually it would seem, I mean, she could have been a really fine queen who was thinking of saving all the subjects from butchery. On the other hand, she could have been just wanting to keep her own power. So I would look at motivations. I would always, when with people have that kind of power, look at it in that way, I think.
And I really appreciate you saying that. Anything else? Because I've got something online, which is
no, that's all.
Very right. Okay, we got there's something that Judith has actually come up with, which in fact, with all my years of doing this, I completely missed out, and it's basically I need to show you a map. And right, okay. Now Judith has basically mentioned this. She said East Anglia was boggy before the area was drained. Did the Romans really want that land rather than the north? And I would say that if I could draw this right, what we're talking about, East Anglia was something more like this, right? And the territory of the Iceni was basically this bit, right, which was very boggy. And so the question is, East Anglia was boggy, so the blue bit's the land, sorry. So East Anglia was boggy before the area was drained by the Romans. So the Romans had to get there. Did the Romans want that land rather than the north? So in other words, that is a really good point. That land of the Brigantes was better than East Anglia, because the Romans had to engineer draining of East Anglia. So in other words, we've got a little bit of a problem there, folks. It's not so whoever said, oh, the land in East Anglia is nice, you know, the Romans, there's not as much land in East Anglia at this stage, because it's really boggy as compared with the north. So that's a really good point to think about. So in other words, this adds to the utter confusion, and thanks for that, Judith.
Yeah, don't forget, a lot of the Northland is moorland as well, though.
And
Mountainous.
But there were a few more trees there, and they actually watched Last of the Summer Wine.
That's true.
And the
Because
Pennines
Pompo and
is
Clegg were
quite
trying to get down the
mountainous.
hill in a bath back then, if you remember.
And drink tea.
Drink tea, yeah, in that tea shop, yeah, exactly. Right, and anyone who can remember the tea shop in Last of the Summer Wine gets full marks. Come on.
The tea
No.
shop? No, I don't.
The tea shop.
Cafe, the calf. Yes, I can
Yeah,
remember
the calf.
cafe. Yeah.
What it was
What
called.
was it called?
I can't remember what it was called.
No.
But who ran the calf?
Dunno.
Oh,
Nora Batty.
It wasn't
Yeah,
No,
Laura
Laura
Batty.
Batty didn't have a cat.
It
I just
wasn't
wanted
Laura
to
Batty.
say that.
It was another woman.
Another woman.
it was. Oh, I can't remember her name.
And she had a hubby as well, a well-built
Oh, the little
hubby. and
fella. Oh, no, it wasn't the little one.
No, the little fella was with Nora Batty.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Mm.
Sounds
I
like I
guess
need
I
to
can
watch it
picture her.
all again.
I can picture her. She
You-
was
you've gotta watch-
well-rounded lady.
Kate.
And they
Yeah,
all
with
used to have the
short,
same-
dark hair.
That's the
Wasn't
one. Yeah,
red.
yeah.
Yeah,
Wasn't
it
red
wasn't
hair.
red. No, she was
Green.
Oh,
brunette.
no, not her. That's Marina. She come in later.
Ah,
That was Howard, wasn't it? Exactly,
Howard
Marina and Howard.
with the bicycle.
Yeah. And they always used to end up in a hedge together, being discovered by
Yeah,
yeah, exactly, by Clegg and
Compo.
Compo and Clegg. Yeah, exactly. Oh God. Right. Okay. On that note, do you know what? It's 9:42. This is getting later every week, even though we're finishing.
It is.
So right. Anyone want to say anything before we finish? And next week I'll be asking you for your monies again. So that's life. But I'll be asking next week. Right. So I'm going to ask quickly as Drina, as Janice, Margaret, and Andy, Emma or David got anything they want to say before we finish?
No, thank you.
no, thanks.
No.
Thank you.
Okay.
I opened
Many,
history lesson, and thank you.
Thank you very-
Your knowledge
thank you very
is
much.
amazing.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say good night now. Thank you, everybody. Thank you,
All right.
David, Emma, Drina, Janice,
Oh,
Margaret,
thank you. Can't wait for next
Ruth,
Tuesday.
and Andy. Thank you very much. My
Good
pleasure.
night.
Oh, thank you. Thanks,
Thank you
Carl.
very much. Nosta. No night. Thank
Good
you,
luck,
everybody. No night.
everybody.
No night. No night. Night, folks. No night. And thank you, everybody on YouTube, for joining us. And obviously, Judith says the Humber will have been very useful either to the Romans or anyone opposing them. And Dodgy Git saying really weird things. So, other than that, what trees were felled? Oh, forget that one. Anyone want to say anything else before we finish?
No, except good night.
Good night.
Good night,
Good
Anna.
night.
Good night, Janice. Good night, Emma and David.
Good
No
night.
night. No night.
All right, thank
No
you.
night. No night. Thank you, David. Everybody. Emma and Anne and Janice. Keep watching me online. Thank you very much.
10 out of 10. Thank you. I'm so enjoying your
Oh,
evenings.
Good, good, good. So you should.
Sure.
I still want to get out on location.
Oh, hold on, where is he? Hold on, gone then.
Yeah,
you gonna say?
we'll get something. We'll be doing a Killian one thing in the future, but not yet.
Yeah, when you've finished filming and they make you a star, and you
I
go
won't
out
be
on
doing
site,
bugger all.
and you go out on site, tell us where you're going, and we'll arrive and bring our archaeology kit.
And I'll sign some books. Exactly.
All right,
Exactly.
lovely.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. You've got the right guy for selling stuff.
Thanks, Carl.
I've been in marketing
Thanks, guys.
all my years. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. Anyway,
See you
thank
later,
you very
lovely.
much. Night, night, guys. Night,
Good
night.
night.
Night,
All
night.
right.
Thank you.
Night, Emma, David.
Oh, hold on.
I don't know what's going on.
Right, have I gone?
No, you're still there, Emma.
Oh, flipping heck.
I'm not even tired.
Hold on, well, just walk away and ignore me then, because I don't know what's going on.
Janice, is
Uh,
there anything you want to say?
I've done
All
it.
right.
I've done it. I've done it.
Night. Anyway, everybody, tatty night, goodbye, Nostar Online. That was a big one, and I've no idea why. Flipping heck, we managed to do a whole 2 and a bit hours on Cartimandua. Christ almighty, we didn't even do 10 minutes in school. If we did her at all. And chat. Oh yeah, Judith. Hang on. Did I do that? We did that chat stuff, didn't we? Nobody responded. Judith to everyone. I'm really struggling to catch everyone speaking. So we'll watch online and comment with a big smiley face. Hopefully you did watch online, Judith, and thank you very much for joining us. So we're going to call that a day. And nothing in that window. No comments there. Nothing in that window. Nothing 1, nothing 2, nothing 3. Not dache. Diolch yn fawr i chi. No night. And eat your potatoes.